I'm Adam Kaiser from Sixth Sense, a VP of Brand and Growth Marketing. We are talking about ABM and content marketing. And this is our fifth session of our Level Up series. So we've been at this for a while now, and I'm sure many of you, or hopefully many of you, have been in earlier sessions. Victoria has posted a link to the upcoming sessions that we have, but the next one is in November, which we're looking at account-based digital advertising, which is always a fun topic. As I mentioned, we did have a change, but it was a great change. We have Pete Lorenko, VP of Marketing from Path Factory. Pete, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, let me start off by saying this is not a product pitch. I promise. We're actually customers of Sixth Sense.
Yes.
I think I'm a 3-time customer of Sixth Sense officially. But let me start off by saying, for all of you listening, if I don't know you, nice to meet you virtually. I'm a dad of 2. That's like how I like to start off. That's the most important thing. I saw a few people from Boston. So I'm a Boston boy originally. Boston will always be home. But I actually now call Charleston, South Carolina home. My kids were born in Charleston. Absolutely love it. And candidly, I just couldn't take the cold anymore. So if you're in Toronto, which is where Path Factory's headquartered, Boston, et cetera, love those areas, but just too cold for me. Passions outside of work are really just exercise, being outside. Part of the reason why I moved to Charleston was much warmer weather, being outside, beaches, golf cart rides. And I grew up in a restaurant. So my parents own restaurants. I'm a big foodie. So fun facts. And if you ever want to riff on food, let's do it. And that's Charleston. If you haven't been, absolutely amazing place for food. So a little bit about me. And then really quickly, like I said, I promise not a product pitch, but if you're sitting there going, who the hell is Path Factory? We really help people like yourselves, B2B marketers, track what content is actually performing, and we help you deliver more of it. Really, the way I'd like to describe it to marketers is historically you're used to tracking clicks and views on your campaigns, but that only gets you so far. Things like you don't really know who's actually engaging with your content. You're not actually to see which accounts are consuming content. You don't actually know whether or not that content is driving results. We really help reveal that information behind it. And then we use AI to help you curate that content. So the simplest way to think about it is we sort of are like the Netflix for B2B content personalization. That's probably the simplest way. And if you're sitting there going, why Pete for this session? 2 parts. One, I'm working a smaller company, so I'm both leader and doer. So I'm involved in all the execution for all the stuff we're about to talk about. I used to have an ABM podcast where I would sit down with some of the best ABM marketers and learn from them. So I can steal a lot of that in all the things that I'm doing. And actually, we host our own bi-weekly live event series. Our last one, we had ABM marketers on it, some of the best in the world. So I'm constantly myself just trying to stay sharp and refresh. So I'm going to bring all that here today to all of you. So.
All right. Thanks, Pete. So just a couple for anyone who's familiar with Sixth Sense. So we've been at this for 10 years now, and our founders really addressed the idea of the company by answering or putting one question out there is, wouldn't sales and marketing be a whole lot easier if we just knew who was looking to buy our product? And that's kind of a simple question, but difficult to answer. And so what Sixth Sense has turned to do is create a platform that helps you understand which accounts are a best fit for you and how to sort of segment and understand who your ICP is and so forth. When accounts are in market, what part of the buying journey they're in, who's on the buying team and who to contact next, how to contact them and what they care about, and even what to say. And now in the age of generative AI, even saying it for you. So really kind of helping to drive on the actual messaging out to those accounts as well. So our agenda today, we're talking about content strategy for ABM. So we're certainly going to talk about identifying and building your audience, your ICP, developing that content. We're going to talk about content by buying stage a little bit, a couple of different ways to look at it, ways to measure success, KPIs, and just some tips and tricks sort of along the way as well. And just a couple of housekeeping items. We'll have Q&A at the end, so feel in the interface, hit that, throw your questions in there, and we will hit as many of those as we can at the end. So with that, I will stop rambling, and I am going to throw it back. I am not going to throw it back. Actually, I am not. I am going to talk about identifying and building your audience. So we talk about ICP a lot. Six Sense has a podcast. We've done almost 50 episodes. I don't think there's an episode that ICP doesn't come up when we're talking to both sales and marketing professionals. So obviously, hugely important, right? So using your customer data to determine your ICP, you want to look for things like industry, location, employee size, revenue size, even how they heard about you. And again, if you've been on some of our earlier sessions, we've talked about that. So critically important. It gets you aligned, sales and marketing together, looking at the same set of accounts, playing from the same sheet of music, and really honing in on where to spend your time, where you're going to be most successful. And obviously your content strategy can be directly aligned to that to make that even more successful. And things like AI and predictive analytics can help you build the ICP, pull in the data. Obviously, Six Sense is in that business, but you don't have to have all the bells and whistles in the world to figure out your ICP. This can be a research process that you put together. So always thinking about your ICP when anything you're doing in ABM, and certainly within when you're creating the content strategy. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Pete.
Yeah, so one thing that's worked really well for me in my last several stops, and what's worked well when we think about how to approach ABM in terms of building an ICP and how you think about starting to build campaigns and content around that, is to think about building your audience sets as groups or clusters. I've heard different terms used for it. So if you're sitting there going like, where can I start? And I'll talk about different strategies here in a second, but one thing I like to do when I'm sitting down with a sales and marketing organization, or I'm sitting down with different friends and we're riffing and trying to consult, so it might be me and Adam on a call, is let's think about that ICP and grouping. So one obvious group would be looking at your net new prospects. Now, a good place to start here, as Adam said, is go into your CRM, whether that's a Salesforce or a different tool, and look at where have you won. What accounts do you have data on, right? Especially first-party data, so you know context of who have engaged with you, or you're able to more easily reach, which opens up a bunch of more channels than if it's a list of accounts and contacts that you've never reached out to before. And as we all know, as marketers with GDPR and things, it far more limits the types of channels and strategies you can use. The types of groupings you can think about when you're looking at CRM data and you're thinking about new prospects to go after, typically verticalization is a great place to start. What I tend to recommend here is try to go after no more than 1 to 3 at a time, because to truly build content and to truly penetrate a vertical effectively and be an expert in that vertical, it's hard to scale out across 10 or 20 at a time. And I've made that mistake, by the way. If Adam were to ask me, like, what's the number one mistake I've made in ABM in the past, it was like trying to go after too many verticals at once. I'm sure, Adam, you've probably done
totally
as well. Another way is regions, right? So you could look at different parts of the world. You could look at a heat map. So in a past life, we are very North America centric. So we looked at a heat map of our customer base, and based on, let's just say, Texas or South Carolina or Florida, we knew we had big concentrations of prospects and customers in those areas. So we went after those specific areas, leveraging our existing customers and base as an extension of trying to go after prospect accounts. And then obviously personas and titles, and this might be based on use cases or different groupings of them in terms of challenges and stuff. And again, we'll talk about some of this here more in the next few slides. Now, one thing for all these buckets I want to mention before I talk about the other two is part of the reason why I like to think about building an ICP or grouping my ABM campaign starting here is this helps feed the types of triggers that I look for that I build programs around. So in other words, one trigger might be, I know that Six Sense and Adam are often hitting our website. They match a vertical bucket that we care about. In this case, it might be tech and SaaS. And we believe that certain triggers like actively hiring, just got recent funding, or heavy engagement with our website is the types of things that would feed an awareness campaign into a nurture ongoing engagement campaign, and then maybe some type of like content offer that drives conversion. So one thing that I think is important anytime you're trying to bucket customers into groupings and think about building ABM strategies and content around them is what type of triggers help inform how you prioritize which accounts you go after, right? One other common mistake I've made is trying to market and sell to like 50,000 accounts at once. That's not really personalization and the idea of ABM trying to personalize outreach if you're trying to market to 50,000 accounts. Instead, if you say you want to go after healthcare, then what are the triggers that help you prioritize and help you understand like these healthcare accounts are the right ones to go after? Now that could be tools like 6sense and intent data. That could be other signals. And we can in Q&A riff on some of that if we want. Another bucket to look at is like re-engagement. So this could be lost ops. This could be postponed or stuck ops, or things that have just been stalled out for different reasons, and dormant leads. So all of us as marketers, depending on the type of marketing funnel you use, you probably have contacts that have been in your database for a long time. How do you re-engage those depending on the different strategies that you have? And then ABM is more than just net new. Typically, when I think about ABM, it's how do I really bridge sales, marketing, and CS together, and really the product team as well. So another strategy is how do you think about your customers as a grouping? And that could be things like cross-sell campaigns, upsell, and adoption. And instead of trying to go after your entire customer base, who are the best customers to cross-sell to? Who are the best customers to increase product adoption? Or who are those customers at risk? And what can you do to address at-risk customers? So Adam and team, like that's one way I like to think about grouping audiences in terms of help feed the content strategies in ABM. And if you're sitting there going, okay, cool, Pete, I've grouped my accounts. What do I do next? What I like to do with a sales and CS organization is take that grouping strategy that we just looked at and then sit down and start to map out, here's what we know about the accounts that we're trying to go after. And you can use them all like this. You can adjust this as you see fit. But this helps inform marketing and sales, in some cases CS, in regards to what do we know about the accounts? Who are the known users? What engagement or intent are they showing today? Meaning things like, I'm trying to go after Adam as the VP of marketing at 6sense. I know that Adam works at Dunder Mifflin. Adam and his team have hit my website X amount of times. They've shown engagement with these types of topics. They've recently invested this type of money, right? Those could be different triggers or signals of reasons I would do outreach. And beyond Adam, I'm trying to reach out to Victoria and others within Dunder Mifflin or 6sense or whomever it is. That's the type of strategy I like to do. And this helps bring that unification between sales and marketing and CS in regards to here's what we know, here's the strategies and the reasons that we're going to be reaching out, and here are the different signals or triggers that are going to help us prioritize when we do our outreach. Next slide.
Maybe that will work. Maybe it won't. Hold on. Sorry. Okay. Here we are.
All right. So then we think about how do we start to create content or develop content. Now, we'll have a few slides that will go into different suggestions about the type of content you create, et cetera. But what I want to do here is start with what my general approach has been, and then I'll share an example of what's worked really well and how we've created that content. So obviously, when I think about ABM and what's worked best for me in my roles, it's really first and foremost sitting down with my team and saying, how do we create content that's truly relevant to the audience, right? So when we think back to how do we best group our ICP into audience groupings or clusters, and then based on those clusters, what do they care about? What are those common challenges? And what are the triggers that could help drive when we do outreach or when we don't? The key is what content can we create that's truly relevant at those times? Said a different way, it's like, how can I actually get Leslie or Steven or Caroline or Adam's attention when, as we all know, attention at these days is, scarce. Now, some questions that I like to guide myself and my team around when we're thinking about the type of content we can create or the types of questions that we have to address in the content we produce are things like, let's just say one of my groupings is I want to go after vertical X. So the questions I would ask are things like, for that vertical, what is the top cause that's giving that audience a challenge, right? And why does this happen? So let's just say in the case of 6sense, we know they're a tech and SaaS company. I'm trying to market to Adam. It's like, what is Adam's common challenge as a VP of marketing at a company like 6sense? He could riff on it, but we won't.
Yeah.
Then the next thing is like, what is sign or evidence that they're facing this challenge? This goes back to that trigger point that I brought up to all of you earlier. So how do we know based on different triggers? That could be Adam using tools like 6sense and looking at keywords that those accounts are actually researching. It could be looking at different content that's being consumed, whether you use different technology or Google Analytics, right? Seeing the types of things that they're engaging with on your site, et cetera. Or that could be looking at different signals you can get from tools like a Zoom Info or Apollo, et cetera, right? There's different ways you can approach this, but the key is based on the challenge you identify, what are the different triggers or signals that you can separately identify that helps you understand whether or not they're expressing that challenge today. Then it's, what are those beliefs that buyers might have? So we all have hidden thought processes around why we might believe certain things. I know Adam probably does as a demand and leader and a marketing leader. I know I absolutely do. What are those false beliefs? What are the things that we know we need to help address or maybe challenge that would get people's attention? Then what's the right way to solve? This is really where you start to introduce your product or solution. And then how do we go about best reaching them, right? So in the case of Path Factory and 6 Sense, we like to market to people like yourselves, right? You're our target ICP, typically B2B marketers. So where do B2B marketers spend time? Conversely, if you're marketing to developers or engineers or whomever it might be, this last bullet is really around, as you start to think about the content you create, you also have to think about content format and the different ways you're going to be able to distribute content, because content distribution at the end of the day is really what marketing is. It's not just creating it. And the key is understanding where we all spend time. So these are some of the questions that I like to approach whenever I'm creating content, whether it's for ABM or not, candidly. And this helps inform a bunch of the content. Now, Adam, if you go to the next slide.
I was just going to say, I think those are like such a great cheat sheet of a couple of questions, like just kind of get to the heart of the matter. So like those are really, especially just like the false beliefs. I mean, it's so clear, but just like really succinct. So big fan of that.
So yeah, now I want to just kind of give an example and then how you can potentially replicate this example for your own company or business, and then what it could look like. So oftentimes when I'm working with different marketers or different marketing leaders, it's like, what is that one thing that I could create for an ABM campaign that, regardless of the stage someone might be in, has legs and is able to help best personalized content for a different audience group? And the one that I always ultimately defer to, no matter the role I've been in, is really, how do I create original insight or research that I can bring to my target audience? Again, think about your audience in those buckets. And if you're sitting there going, well, some products benefit from capturing customer data, tools like Gong or Path Factory or 6 Sense have unique insights on a customer. Sure, there are some roles in companies that better lend itself to this, but there's other ways that you can capture that data and be able to replicate this type of approach. And I'm going to show how we do it, but one way is just simply take a group of your customers, survey them, or interview 10 or 15 of them, ask simple questions around what their problems were, where do they get information, what are the things that keep them up at night, or what are those false beliefs? And then you have an opportunity to become a authority and bring those insights to people like themselves, right? So again, if I'm trying to market to Adam, who works in a SaaS and tech company, I might go to Adam and say, hey, Adam, I've talked to 20 people just like you. Here are the common things that we hear. Thought you might find this stuff useful. You might be able to twist that into different things, et cetera. There might be other questions you ask. And Adam may or may not agree with what I'm about to say, but like, if you're like me, and I'm sure Adam's the same way, I'm always interested to hear what my peers are doing or different strategies that work for my peers. And if you become that authority to help bring that insight, it's far more likely to get a response from the audience you're trying to go after. And as I mentioned earlier, as we think about how to create content that gets attention, obviously creating the content, and I'll again get into this in a second, is important, but please don't forget about distribution. It's probably the biggest mistake I've made in past lives. And when I think about distribution, I like to think about it in terms of the formats that I'm creating content around. So that might be a webinar, that might be snippets from a webinar, that might be a social post, and obviously the channel. So you're all at the core, I believe most of this audience is marketers, so I'm not going to talk about different channels and stuff like that. I want to leave time for more important things. But as you can see on this slide, there's different channels to think about, and then making sure that you align that content to the channels that you're on. So for example, if you're trying to distribute content on LinkedIn or tools like LinkedIn, that concept of zero-click content, which I believe Amanda Natividad helped champion, that's the idea of giving value of the content you produce, those insights, in the ad itself. So meaning I don't have to click on the ad to get valuable insights. That's an idea of being mindful of, when I reach out to this target audience, I know I got to distribute content. And the key is like, how do you give me some insight up front that doesn't require me to click? And just being mindful about the channel you're using and how you best distribute content on that channel. Next slide. So 2 examples. So some of you may have seen this because you might actually be our target ICP for Path Factory. But one of the things that we've done is we have defined specific verticals based on where we've had success as a company. We've mined data. So because we are tracking the type of content that B2B marketers are using and sending to their own customer bases, we're able to see the content formats, how often that content is being consumed, and whether or not those businesses are having success distributing that content. So what we're doing is we're verticalizing those content insights. So we're taking subsets of our customer base, we're verticalizing it, and then we're distributing to those key ICP verticals that we're going after. Now, one of the things I'm very bullish on, and why I love original research and insights, and Adam and I were riffing on this earlier, but I particularly love using social channels as an early distribution channel, especially if it's an audience set that I don't have a lot of first-party data on, or due to GDPR, I don't have the ability to email or do one-to-one outreach initially on. Social for me is important because whether it's an ad or an original post, or organic post, I should say, we're able to see in real time, some examples you see on the screen, whether or not our target ICP is finding that stuff useful. So I was saying to Adam, like, I'm very bullish on this because, another mistake I've made in ABM in the past is I spent all this time creating content. I thought the content was great. I start sharing it to my target audience, and I quickly realized, like, oh shit, that missed the mark. But then it took me like 2 or 3 months of email sending, and maybe it's hosting a webinar, and all the time it took to produce a webinar, promote the webinar, actually have the webinar take place. And a lot of time goes past before I kind of know if we're hitting the mark. Whereas if we produce something, we start distributing it in real time to our target ICP using channels like social, I can get real-time feedback pretty quickly in regards to, is this content working? Does that target audience find it useful? And where do I need to pivot or adjust? So one thing I do stress, it's something that I've tried to do in every single role. I've marketed to IT buyers before. I've marketed to marketers. I've marketed to developers. No matter the role, I've tried to use social channels where I can as a way to get feedback on whether or not the content I'm producing is hitting. Next slide.
I think there's been some examples recently of when it doesn't hit, and people are very vocal.
Very vocal.
About like, what is this? So that's the...
Yeah, and feedback's a blessing, right? It's not always easy to hear like, hey, your email looks like it's not landing right, or it looks like it doesn't look like it's formatted correctly. I mean, that's not always easy to hear. Or this content piece isn't effective, or hey, this content piece would be better if it was X. But like, I view that stuff as a blessing.
100%.
And it just makes me and the team more effective. So where you can, and I know it's not easy, and if you're like me, you're constantly asking yourself, like, what do I post and when, or how do I best use these channels? Don't be afraid to just use those channels as simply a distribution channel with the simple goal of being, even if 2 people look at it and one of those people gives you feedback, it can be extremely valuable in helping you gauge quickly as to whether or not some of this content's hitting the mark. That way, if you're planning to do 3 webinars and those webinars are going to happen over the next 90 days, or you're planning to do 2 conferences aimed at that specific vertical or buying group, that gives you some of that real-time feedback that helps you better position some of those other things that you're planning to do later on. Now, as I mentioned, another way we're trying to do this is it's not always easy to create a research report or a benchmark report or an insight report. It can be hard. And by the way, I've chatted with the person who created it for Gong and Clary, and I've talked to different people just to steal what's worked best for them and their best practices. This stuff is hard. So another way to do it, and something that we're in the early stages of, and I think similar to what 6th Sense is doing here, is bring in experts. So bring in your customers. So if you're marketing to engineers or developers, get some of those people into a forum. So it could be, maybe one of the sessions is literally, what is the best way to reach developers? Common question I've had when I've tried to market to developers in the past. Or it's, whatever the topic or themes might be, bring them in together to a format like this, and then turn that content into a recurring series, or turn it into snippets that you can use in email outreach. You can use an ad outreach. You can use an organic post. That, again, is a type of content that Adam, as a potential buyer or influencer, or my uncle who's a CTO, they're going to be more likely to want to hear what their peers are saying or doing, as opposed to what Pete, the marketer, or Adam, the marketer, is saying, right? So for us, what we've done is we host a bi-weekly live event show. I'm not trying to pitch it. You do not have to join, I promise. We bring in experts like Karina, who you see on the screen, is a super talented ABM marketer and someone I've had the ability to just pick her brain a lot. And Karina and Mason, Crosby, and a few others joined us, talked about different ABM best practices and mistakes they've made with ABM. And then we're distributing that to our own audience set as like, hey, Pat Factory helps you try to better do content marketing and best distribute that content. Here's some advice when you're trying to create content for ABM, or here's some advice when you're trying to do X, Y, and Z. And the byproduct of doing this is we look like the authority, even though all the expertise and insight is coming from prospects and customers. So again, if you're sitting there and looking for ways to like, how do I create good content? And maybe I don't have the subject matter expertise, or maybe I don't know the best answer. Think about ways to pull in your own customers, or think about ways to pull in your own CIO or your own CTO if you're going after an IT audience or whomever it might be, and let them be the champion for helping create or bring content to the target personas that you're going after. And then one last thing I wanted to share is, and I'll admit I'm very early on this, but as we think about creating content that's valuable, another way you can create content is, as I mentioned, using prospects, using your own customers, or using influencers. So something that we're now testing is, again, going after B2B marketers. We're pulling in other B2B marketers, and we're using them both as a distribution channel and a content creation channel for us. And that just, one, it expands our reach exponentially, but two, it's just an easy, it kind of goes back to that last slide. It's an entire new channel for us in terms of content creation, content distribution of stuff we're creating, like original research or the podcast, et cetera. And the beauty is I can also get feedback on how people are responding to these posts. So like I'll reach out to Brendan or Misha and say like, hey, how'd this post do? What was the feedback? And like, how do we take that feedback and adjust future ones that we're gonna do? Couldn't suggest doing it more. And again, like I said, and I think there's some questions, but I've done this for developers. I've done this for IT. Like this works as long as you have the right people that can connect to those people. And then Adam, do you want to riff here? Maybe you start so I can just take a quick drink.
Yeah. So we talk about, and actually before I go into this, just the one thing to say is that this level up series that you're in right now is very much a lot of things that Pete was talking about. And when we went off and we developed this, most of it was informed by you're all in our ICP. We've got you here. Kidding. What was sort of the interest or the research that was happening helped drive our topics, and bringing in our customers and other thought leaders to provide insights. Because again, people don't want to just listen to us go off all day long, and we don't know everything, to obviously point as well. So you are in a branded content experience that was very much built around a lot of the things that Pete was talking about. So when we talk about buying stage content, right? And again, nothing is linear, right? We talk about the buying journey. Like it's not like you don't fit nicely here and then you progress here and you progress here. You're going to jump all over the place. And I think we can both agree that content is useful and helpful for anyone at any number of stages. And one of the great things about Path Factory is in application, if you're nurturing or somebody else, you can jump in and you can binge all the content if you're set up in such a way. So like, I might send you here, but like, here's 5 other things, go in and binge to your delight. So we talk about like content by stage. Again, this is not that different really from sort of traditional top, middle, bottom lead funnel type of content. But in this slide, we're talking about like, again, you're early awareness. And these actually 4 stages align to the 6 sense predictive stages that we use in our product. But in terms of just like your awareness is you're early, right? You're showing signs of life, but not specifically engaging with vendors for the most part. You may have some information about who you want to work with, or you may know names, but I mean, you're just kind of out there. And things like early stage, social media posts, blogs, and webinars. There could be some folks in here that are now that are not 6 Sense customers, are early in their stage of ABM and are trying to learn. Hopefully this is really helpful content to talk about how you would apply your content strategy there. And then sort of moving down funnel from consideration, decision, and purchase. I don't know, Pete, if you have any particular thoughts.
No, I think the only thing I would add, again, I think you and I were riffing before this, is I think this is good general best practices or suggestions about the type of content formats you can think about in the different stages. But just because you see blogs listed in awareness doesn't mean a blog can't serve bottom of the funnel purpose as well. In fact, if you think about certain blogs you might create, some of those blogs might be listicles that compare 6 cents versus competitor X and Y. And that would definitely be a blog I would look at as more of a late stage asset that would absolutely be valuable in an ABM playbook, but probably in the mid or later cycle, right? You're not going to send comparison guides or comparison blogs in the early stages. That's probably way too soon. But don't just, the thing I always like to say to people is don't look at these and just assume blog means awareness. All these content formats can be absolutely used for different stages as long as you're mindful about the purpose that content format serves at the time you're distributing it.
100%. And one thing that, and I realize this is a little bit small, so I apologize. One thing that we've done, again, this is a little bit more specific to our setup, but it's interesting and helpful because we looked at our accounts at a certain period of time that were sitting in different stages, right? And with the data that we had from an intent, website, engagement, contacts, that type of thing. And it kind of tells the story of the types of content topically that'll work and also formats as well. So if accounts are sitting in the awareness stage, we see a lot of like generic keyword intent going on. So for us, it might be somebody out there researching account-based marketing, sales intelligence, B2B marketing, like really sort of general stuff. They're not really researching or there's not intent firing for us as a brand. Almost no website engagement. So again, this is not so linear, but you could think, okay, early on, there's this sort of research going on, but they're not hitting the vendor site. So they don't know about you or they're not ready to engage with a vendor. And there's really no engagement from a contact level, meaning our BDRs or our sales team haven't got anything going on with that particular customer or prospect. And then as you make your way down, what you start to see happen is that branded search starts to increase because now they're starting to look at vendors. You're starting to see more website visits come in, and then contact engagement goes up. So again, it's just sort of another data point to understand in the buyer journey the type of behaviors that are going on that can help drive the type of content that you create and when you get it in front of that those particular prospects. So
yeah, and I want to be mindful of time. So Adam, I'm going to go super quick on this part. So when I think about ABM, y'all, like I think about it in kind of, I was making notes. There's really 4 buckets I like to approach ABM strategy. And the first is the data. And that's what we talked about first, which is how do you build your targeted ICP and how do you identify the right triggers that help feed and determine when you best outreach to people. The next is really the channel, right? So which channels, and I think there's a question that we'll hopefully be able to get to in a second, which is how do you best reach that audience that you're going after? Then it's the content, right? It's what are you sending or what are the different offers and how you best distribute those. We talked a little bit about different strategies that you can use. And then there's this, which is how do you track the success of ABM? And this is part of the reason why I've personally bought different technology in the past, but I like to leave this as the last one because if you don't nail the strategy behind the first 3, this will fail. To be very clear, I've made the mistake of mapping out all the KPIs and measurements before and then buying tech like a 6 cents, no offense, Adam, to help me do these things. But the strategy was flawed and then the results sucked. But if you're sitting there going, cool, I'm aligned on the first 3. I've got a good strategy. I feel good about the strategy. I'm aligned with my go-to-market team. The types of metrics that I like to focus on measuring are a combination of campaign level. And this is really where your first party data starts to come into place. Things like website visits, click-through rates on your different campaigns or display ads, email opens, and things like that. Then here's your account and contact level. So this would be if you have 50 accounts that you're trying to go after, what percentage of the accounts are engaged, what percentage of accounts are not engaged. And tools like 6 Sense can absolutely help you measure this. New context created is one I love. So it's like I'm going after these 50 accounts prior to doing any ABM campaigns. None of them were in our database. We didn't have the ability to reach them. Now, X percentage of them have responded to campaigns. We're able to actually do outreach to them. They're GDPR compliant, all that important stuff. I think this is a critical one. And then stage progression. So whether you look at CRM data or you, again, look at tools like 6 Sense, be able to track progression can be vital in helping you understand if this is working. And then most importantly, those metrics help are good leading indicators, sort of like MQLs. But please don't lose sight of business level. If your strategy is effective and you've got the right targeting and content in place and and whatnot, and you're starting to see positive momentum in these first two buckets, then you should be able to see business level impact. Things like pipeline created, opportunities created, win rates, and all that stuff. And to wrap this up, for me, at least my part, if you go to the next slide, Adam, here's some quick ways we're doing it. And these are really small, apologies, but I promise I wasn't going to do a pitch, but this is the one thing that I use our own Path Factory product for. So it's things, if you build this out, one more, Adam, one more click. One thing I use Path Factory for is like, which of my content assets for different campaigns are getting the most engagement time? And then what is that lift? So because we're like, we are that Netflix for B2B content buyer journeys, I'm able to see like if Leslie clicked on asset 1 and I know it's based on ABM, and now I'm serving up other relevant content based on where we believe she is in her buyer journey, combining Path Factory data with 6 Sense data, I'm able to see that lift in terms of other content that Leslie or Adam or someone's engaging with. And that's stuff I'm measuring. And then I'm looking at what percentage of accounts I'm able to reach with content, what's their engagement time. So this gives me that idea of some of those campaign and account level metrics. I'm also using LinkedIn. So that's that next screenshot. So I'm looking at which percentage of LinkedIn which percentage of those target accounts am I reaching with targeted LinkedIn ads? Are those accounts engaging? Are those accounts following us, right? So I'm using different LinkedIn metrics for that. And I'm using 6 Sense to help me understand some of that stuff around contacts, right? Have we created new contacts? Are those contacts engaging? Have those accounts progressed in their engagement and journey with us? And then I'm combining all this with CRM data around opportunity creation and all that stuff. So these are some of the ways that we do it, which kind of goes to the last quick slide. And then I do want to leave time for questions. But if I were to recap this, some other tips for all of you is really at the end of the day, all of our jobs here is how do we deliver the right content in ABM play to the right buyer at the right time. How I like to think about this is really from a right content perspective. If you're not sure, spend some time with your customers. Just talk to a few of them. What do they care about? What are some of those false beliefs? What are their big challenges? How can you best reach them? And then create content that answers those questions. That could be original research. That could be taking those interviews that you're having, snipping them up or cutting them into different formats that you can use to outreach to similar buyers like them. Then it's, even if you don't use technology, there's simple ways using your marketing automation platform or your email tool, using tools like LinkedIn, using your own campaign, different tools you might be using, where you can track who's engaging with your campaigns, right? This could be webinar signups and which of contacts associated with target accounts you're trying to go after. This could be just which accounts are visiting your website and using GA, right? So there's simple ways to do it, and then there's more complex, which really goes into the last point, which is technology absolutely makes this easier. I promise it does. But as I mentioned before, don't focus on getting technology until you align your strategy first. But once you do, tools like Path Factory, 6 Sense absolutely help you better understand where buyers are. They help unleash certain signals that you can and triggers that you can build outreach around. And then tools like Path Factory and 6 Sense, especially together, can help you automatically personalize when you deliver content you have and whether or not that content's being engaged with. That just helps you make these campaigns more effective. I don't know if there's anything to add. If not, we can nail out some of these questions real quick.
Yeah, I think the last thing to say is just think about that, and this could be a whole other session, but think about that content flywheel, that when you create something, repurpose it, using it in other places. You'll see again, this webinar, like it doesn't stop today. And we're going to be using this for a lot of different things, going back to the same ICP and so forth. So think about repurposing and how that content can get repurposed, can be built into something else, videos, all sorts of fun things. So a huge part of, you have a great asset, use it as many different ways as possible. So with that, we are going to jump into some Q&A, and we are running a bit late, so you can do this.
All right.
No, great. All right, so first question. We've been working on collaborating with current customers to create content, but it requires a lot of chasing. Any tips on how to make outreach successful and faster? That's a good question. I think I can jump in on that one. So I think it's really, you do have to stay very close. One of the things is it's a little bit of a sell, because giving your customers, say, look, this is an opportunity for you to showcase your work, an opportunity to showcase what you're doing. both internally as well, right? Because like you can share it to their internal management teams and so forth. So we've had a lot of success in kind of helping the customers sort of create the case study for their own work internally that they can share. And there's a little bit of a what's in it for them as well.
Yeah. If you don't mind, to add, and I think Sarah, you asked this, there's a couple of strategies I've employed. One is you likely have an advisor group or board that likely some of your customers or key people tied to the ICP you're trying to go after are likely representing. Start there. Probably the easiest place I've ever had a ability to launch some of this initially is starting with advisors who make up some of that ICP naturally. If you don't have that, especially if you're an early stage startup, and I've experienced that as well, even if you can get one. So like what I've always told my team is let's find one customer. And unfortunately, it means you milk them a little bit initially. But even if it's, I reach out to Adam and it's like, hey, Adam, like help me. I'm going to compensate you with gifts or whatever as a customer and for appreciation of your time. But like help me be a starting place for these things and then just slowly build from there. And I think if you can at least approach it one of those two as a start, at least from my experience, it's a good launch pad. And then over time, you'll just find it. But to be very clear, Sarah, your challenge is not unique. We've all been there. Obviously, the bigger you are as a company, typically it's a little bit easier because you just have more customers to pull from. But if you're sitting there with a few customers or just early stage, start with advisors. If that doesn't work, try to pick one customer, start there. And if you don't even have that, just, I think, bypass customers altogether and identify prospects and find a strategy that you can get prospects on the horn with you. That could be a podcast. That could just be an interview series. That could be incenting them to meet with you for 15 minutes in exchange for $50 or whatever it is. And you're just looking to meet, have time with them to pick their brain on things. And one thing I found, Adam, you probably found this too, is just reaching out to people and asking for time. Most people want to help, and most people are usually open to spending 15 or 20 minutes with you.
Yeah. All right. We'll make this our last question here because this has got the most votes. So how do you get the content you're testing to your ICP? Do you do paid promotions to target to this audience? And also, if you don't receive any comments on your social posts, how do you get the feedback on how to tweak or adjust that content?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I like to think about content distribution in a few buckets. So one is events. So if I'm going after a specific vertical, I'd like to look at the different verticalized events I can test. Obviously, I mentioned social channels. That's both paid and organic. And if, a subset of your question is ones if you're not getting comments, that's okay. Like comments help you best understand if things are working initially. One way to do that is you could directly reach out to some of the people that you're trying to reach and just seek feedback. That's something I have done is I'll reach out to someone like Adam and be like, hey, Adam, can I get 10 minutes with you? I just want to pick your brain about some stuff. We actively try to go after people like yourself. And I'm just trying to gauge, things that you care about, et cetera. And Adam, not to speak for you, but I'm sure you're willing to give someone 10 minutes as long as it's not a sales pitch. And you promise, I'm not going to pitch you. And one thing I've done with some of the ICP in the past is hey, do you find this compelling? Or if I ask you to describe what I do for developers, could you give it to me in your own words? And I have been able to, even with people who are not customers, be able to get insight that I can use for content just by getting on a call for 10 minutes and asking people to give me feedback in exchange for coffee or lunch or whatever. And again, the hardest part is having the courage to ask. But if you ask, I think you're going to find more often than not, people are willing to spend a small period of time and give you some insight, but please don't pitch them. This is not a sales pitch. Other channels, influencers and SMEs. If you're going after marketers, obviously find, different marketers. If you're going after developers, find your own internal SMEs, right? So find some engineers in your company or developers in your company and see if they can help you create content or see if they can help you answer some of these questions and become a voice for you to post on for your company's behalf. Or do outreach to other developers to be able to get you insight, right? Things like that. Because people trust their peers. They don't trust. It's like buying a car. None of us trust the salesperson. And then your own sales and BDR team. They can be the easiest path to getting feedback. So one thing I do is I'll ask them to send out stuff, et cetera. And then any responses they get, I ask them just forward it to marketing. And I try to get as much insight I can from the feedback that sales is getting.
Yeah. That's not great. So we're over. So I'm going to say to everyone, Pete, thank you so much. I think this is a great session. As I said, we had a replacement, but we We had a great replacement, even better replacement, perhaps. Not to, although if anyone's out there, don't get that back to our original speakers because they were great also. I'm kidding. Anyway, Pete, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And we will see you here next month for our next session of Level Up. And keep your eye out for a link back to the recording and the slides. Thanks so much.
Thanks all.